The envelope was still on the counter when I woke up that Tuesday morning. I had put it there myself the night before. A cream-colored envelope with a small maple leaf sticker on the seal, the kind you find at Dollarama near the greeting card section. Inside was a handwritten note I'd been drafting for 3 weeks. A note to my daughters explaining that I had been planning something for all of us. Something I had been quietly building for 2 years without saying a word to anyone. I stood at the kitchen window with my tea, red rose, 2 sugars, no milk, same as always, and watched the first snow of November settle onto the back garden. The bird feeder my late husband had mounted to the fence post was empty again. I kept forgetting to fill it. There was a time I never would have forgotten something like that. There was a time I kept track of everything and everyone in this family without being asked. My name is Dorothy. I am 67 years old. I live alone in a 2-bedroom bungalow in Oakville, Ontario, the same house where I raised 3 children, hosted 32 Christmases, and kept a vegetable garden that my neighbors still talk about. I retired 4 years ago after 31 years as an administrative coordinator at a community health center. I know how to manage things. I know how to plan. I know how to love people quietly and completely without making a fuss about it. That, I have come to understand, was part of the problem. I want to tell you what happened. Not because I am looking for sympathy, though what I felt in those weeks was as close to grief as anything I have experienced since I buried my husband. I want to tell you because I think some of you will recognize this story. Not the specific details, but the shape of it. The feeling of pouring yourself into people and then one day standing in your own kitchen, holding a cup of tea that has gone cold, realizing you have become invisible to the very people you built your life around. Let me go back to where it started. Or rather, where I started. 2 summers ago, my oldest granddaughter, my daughter, Claire's youngest, a girl named Abby, turned to me at a family barbecue and said, completely unprompted, "Grandma, have you ever been to Banff?" I told her I hadn't, not since I was in my 30s, and even then it had only been a quick drive-through on the way to somewhere else. Abby, who is 11 and has recently decided she wants to be a wildlife photographer, looked at me with the full seriousness that only a child can manage and said, "You should go. I think you would cry at the mountains." I laughed. I told her she was probably right, but I didn't stop thinking about it. That fall, I started looking things up. Not seriously at first, just browsing, the way you do on a quiet evening when the television feels like too much and the house feels like too much and you need somewhere for your mind to go. I looked at photos of Lake Louise in October. I read about the Icefields Parkway. I watched a short video someone had filmed at sunrise from the top of Sulphur Mountain, the whole valley below still in shadow, while the peaks caught the first light, and I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and felt something shift quietly in my chest. I had spent 31 years making sure other people's appointments were kept, and their paperwork was filed and their needs were met. I had spent the better part of 4 decades making sure my children had what they needed, that birthdays were remembered, that report cards were talked through calmly, that no one ever felt alone in that house, if I could help it. My husband, Robert, and I had always said we would travel when he retired. We had a list on the fridge not written down, just understood between us the way long marriages develop their own language, of places we would go. The Maritimes. Churchill to see the polar bears. Maybe Scotland, where his family came from. Robert died 11 months before his retirement date. A stroke, very sudden, on a Wednesday afternoon in March. He had been shoveling the driveway. After that, I stopped thinking about the list. But watching that sunrise video, something came back. A small, stubborn thing. A voice that sounded the way I used to sound before I got so good at being needed. I decided, quietly and entirely on my own, that I was going to take my family to Banff. All of them. My daughter Claire, her husband, and their 2 daughters. My daughter Susan and her partner. My son Mark and his wife Tanya and their son. A proper family trip, the kind Robert and I had always talked about, but never quite managed to pull off when the children were young. 10 days. The Fairmont Banff Springs, horseback riding, a gondola ride, a private van to take us up the Icefields Parkway, dinner together every night. I did not tell anyone. Not yet. I wanted to plan it first. I wanted it to be real before I made it a promise. I opened a separate savings account at my credit union. A TFSA I had not touched since Robert passed, and I began moving money into it every month. Not enormous amounts. I was careful. I had my pension from the health center, a small survivor benefit, and I had been sensible with the house. I was not wealthy by any stretch. But I had lived carefully for a long time, and I had more set aside than most people knew. Every month, I moved $500 into that account. Sometimes more if I had been disciplined. I gave up the meal kit subscription. I canceled the cable package and kept just the internet. Small things. I told no one because I wanted the moment of telling them to be perfect. I spent 2 years on this. I researched the hotels the way I used to research medical suppliers for the health center thoroughly, methodically, with a spreadsheet. I called the Fairmont directly and spoke to a woman named Karen who helped me understand what the accessible options were for a family group because Claire's older daughter has some mobility challenges and I wanted to make sure everything was right. I researched the best weeks to go for weather. I read forums where people described hiking trails in terms of difficulty, and I made notes on which ones would work for everyone, including me with my knee that has never fully forgiven me for the years I spent standing on hard floors. By the time Abby turned 13 last spring, I had just over $22,000 set aside. And then I began to plan in earnest. I booked 12 nights at the Fairmont Banff Springs, 2 connecting family suites, and 1 junior suite for myself for the 2nd week of September, which the forums all agreed was the best time after the worst of the summer crowds, but before the mountain cold really set in. I booked the gondola. I booked a horseback riding company that had good reviews and specifically mentioned being accommodating to riders of mixed experience levels. I put down a deposit with a private tour company for the Icefields Parkway. I looked into a rafting option but decided against it my knee, and I wanted Susan's partner to feel comfortable since she had mentioned he was not much for physical activities. I paid the deposits. I bought trip cancellation insurance, a Canadian habit I never abandon, on all the major bookings, naming myself as the policyholder. And on a Sunday afternoon in late April, I drove to Claire's house and then to Susan's apartment, and then I called Mark on FaceTime because he lives in Mississauga, and I had already done enough driving, and I told them, all of them, same day, same afternoon. I told them about Abby and the mountains. I told them about the account I had been quietly filling. I told them I had already made the major bookings and that I needed their passport information and their travel dates confirmed within the next 3 weeks so I could finalize the flights. I told them I was paying for the accommodations and the major activities and that everyone would cover their own flights and personal spending. The reactions were, and I want to be precise here, warm. Not overwhelmingly so, but warm. Claire said, "Mom, that is so thoughtful. I can't believe you did all this." Susan said, "Are you sure? That's a lot of money." Mark said his wife Tanya would need to check her work schedule, and he would get back to me. I should have paid more attention to that last part. I went home and felt something I had not felt in years. A kind of lightness. I made dinner for myself, salmon with roasted sweet potato, a glass of Riesling, and I sat at the kitchen table and felt, genuinely, and without qualification, happy. The passport information came in from Claire within the week. Susan confirmed her dates the following Wednesday. Mark told me Tanya's schedule was complicated, but he would sort it out. Weeks passed. I sent a follow-up to Mark. Polite. I said I needed the information by a certain date, or the booking window would close. He said Tanya was still sorting things out at work. I said I understood. I just needed to know. He said he would let me know by the weekend. The weekend came and went. 3 weeks before my self-imposed deadline, I called Mark on a Tuesday evening. He picked up after 4 rings. There was noise in the background, his son's video game, I thought, or the television. He sounded distracted. I asked him gently where things stood, and then there was a pause that lasted long enough that I moved the phone away from my ear to check that the call had not dropped. He said, "Mom, I've been meaning to call you about this. Tanya's parents are also planning a trip this fall, and they've asked us to come with them, to PEI. It's kind of a thing for their family. Their anniversary." I said I understood. I asked if the dates overlapped. He said they did. Completely. I said, "So you won't be coming to Banff?" He said, "I don't think so, no. And Mom, Tanya's parents haven't traveled much, and her dad's health isn't great, and I think this might be one of the last chances for them to do something like this as a family. It's important to her." I said I understood. And I did. I genuinely did. Family is family. Then I asked carefully about the deposit I had paid for his suite. He said, "And I want to be exact here, because the exact words matter. I mean, if you could apply it to something else, that would be great. Or honestly, just let us know what we owe you for the deposit, and we can sort it out. Just let us know what we owe you." After I had spent 2 years and $22,000 building something for him, I said I would look into it and get back to him. I said goodbye. I set my phone on the counter. I stood at my kitchen window and looked at the bird feeder, which was still empty, and I felt the lightness from that Sunday evening in April drain out of me completely. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. I am not telling you this story as a sad story. I am telling you what happened. I sat down at my kitchen table, and I thought very carefully. And then I opened my laptop, and I looked at the trip cancellation insurance policy I had purchased. And because I had been sensible and thorough, as I always am, I saw exactly what I needed to see. My name was on everything. Every booking, every deposit, every cancellation clause. I was the policyholder. I was the primary contact. I had done this the way I did everything properly, completely, as if it mattered, because it had mattered, to me at least. The following morning I called the Fairmont. I explained that my family group had changed and I needed to modify the reservation. I canceled the junior suite I had booked for Mark and Tanya, and I upgraded my own room. Then I called my friend Lorraine, who is 69 and teaches piano and has been trying to get me to do something adventurous with her for 3 years, and I asked her if she had plans in September. She did not. I called my friend Patricia, who is 71 and recently retired from teaching grade 4, and who cried at my husband's funeral in a way that I will never forget. I asked her the same question. She also did not have plans. Then I called Susan and told her that Mark and Tanya would not be joining us, and that I was sorry for the change, and that the trip was still happening. She sounded relieved, though I did not press her on that. I called Claire and told her the same. She paused and said, "Are you okay, Mom?" I told her I was better than okay. I told her I had made some adjustments. Then I wrote a note to Lorraine and Patricia. A real note, not a text. I have always thought that real news deserves paper. I told them we were going to Banff. I told them for 12 nights. I told them I was treating them to the hotel and the major activities because I had planned and budgeted for more than it turned out I needed, and there was no sense in that money sitting in an account when it could be turned into mornings at Lake Louise. Lorraine called me 20 minutes after I dropped the note in her mailbox. She said, "Dorothy, are you serious?" I said I was entirely serious. She started laughing, and then she started crying a little, and then she said, "I haven't been anywhere since 2019. I know the feeling," I told her. "I know it exactly. Now, I want to tell you about the part that happened in between, because I am not going to pretend it was clean and simple." About a week after I had made all these changes, Mark called. He called on a Thursday evening, and I could tell from his voice that he had been thinking about what to say. He was measured. "Careful," he said. "Mom, Tanya's sister mentioned that she'd heard you weren't using the room at the Fairmont anymore and that you'd added some other people to the booking. I did not ask how Tanya's sister knew this. Some things travel faster than you expect," he said. "I just want to make sure there are no hard feelings." I sat with that for a moment. No hard feelings? I said, "Mark, I planned this trip for 2 years. I saved for it for 2 years. I booked everything in my name and paid all the deposits. When I told you about it, you said you would confirm your information, and you did not. When I followed up, you continued to delay. When I called to ask directly, I found out you had already made other plans without telling me." He was quiet. I said, "I don't have hard feelings. But I also didn't cancel my plans because yours changed." I adjusted mine. There was a long pause. Then he said, "You could have said something sooner, and here is the part I am most proud of. Because I had thought about this. I had sat at that kitchen table, and I had thought about every version of this conversation, and I had decided what I believed to be true." I said, "You're right. And so could you." He didn't say much after that. We ended the call politely. We have spoken since then birthdays, a family dinner at Claire's in late summer, and things are not broken between us. But they are different. I think they needed to be different. I think I had been so careful not to make things uncomfortable for so long that I had made myself invisible in the process. I want to tell you about September. We flew into Calgary on a Friday morning, me, Lorraine, Patricia, Claire, her husband, and their 2 daughters. Susan and her partner met us at the airport, having taken a slightly different flight. We drove to Banff in a rented van with the windows down, even though it was only 14 degrees because Lorraine said she needed to smell the air, and none of us argued. I had been to Banff once, 34 years ago, in a car with Robert and 3 small children who needed snacks every 40 minutes and someone to referee their disagreements about which side of the seat belonged to whom. It had been beautiful, I remembered that, but we had not stopped long. We had kept moving because that is what you do when your children are small and your time is limited, and you are always in the middle of something. This time I stopped. I stood at the edge of Lake Louise on the second morning before the rest of them were up, before the tour buses arrived, before the light had quite finished arriving, and I looked at that water, which is a color that should not exist in nature, a blue-green that looks like someone invented it, and I felt my husband standing somewhere near me, not in a supernatural sense, just in the sense that some people leave a shape in the air around you that takes a very long time to fade. I thought about the list on the fridge, the one that was never written down. I thought, well, Robert, we got here. Abby stood next to me for a while in silence, which is unusual for her. Then she said, "Grandma, are you crying?" I said I was just cold. She took my hand. We stood there together until the others came down. Patricia fell in love with the gondola. She stood at the top of Sulphur Mountain and looked at the valley exactly the way I had imagined, someone standing at the top of Sulphur Mountain and looking at the valley. And she said, absolutely quietly, "I spent 40 years in a classroom teaching other people's children to see the world, and I forgot to look at it myself." I did not say anything. I just stood next to her. Some moments do not need a response. Lorraine rode a horse named Gerald. Gerald was, by all accounts, a horse of strong opinions and limited interest in following directions. Lorraine and Gerald reached a mutual understanding somewhere around the 3rd kilometer that delighted everyone watching. At dinner that evening, she delivered a 15-minute monologue about Gerald's personality that reduced Claire's younger daughter to tears of laughter. We ate together every night. Long dinners, the kind where you order dessert not because you are hungry, but because you are not ready to leave. My granddaughter Abby photographed everything: the mountains, the elk that walked through the hotel grounds one evening with complete indifference to the humans scrambling for their phones, the way the light changed on the peaks through the day. She showed me her photos each evening before bed. They were extraordinary. They were the kind of photographs that a person takes when they are actually looking. On the last evening, after dinner, Lorraine raised her glass and said she wanted to say something. She is not given to speeches usually, which is why when she speaks, you listen. She said, "Dorothy, I have known you for 22 years. I have watched you take care of everyone in every room you have ever been in. And I want to say, in front of these people who also love you, that you deserve to be taken care of too. And if you won't let anyone else do it, then good for you for doing it yourself." Claire looked at her plate. I think she understood what was being said beneath what was being said. I thanked Lorraine. I told her she was very dramatic for a piano teacher. She said drama was how you kept children paying attention through scales. I did not make a speech. I am not a speech person, but I want to tell you what I thought about on the flight home, sitting in 14A with a ginger ale and the prairies moving below me in the dark. I thought about how I had spent so long being necessary that I had forgotten to ask what I needed. I had kept everyone's schedules and everyone's feelings and everyone's requirements in my head for so long that I had stopped having requirements of my own, or if I had them, I expressed them so quietly that they could be easily overlooked. I had made it very easy for people to overlook me. I had practically provided instructions. I am not angry at my son. I want to be clear about that. He made a choice that made sense to him. I think he did not fully understand what he was choosing against, and I think some part of that is because I had never made it fully clear how much it mattered. I am working on that. The making things clear part. What I know is this. I am 67 years old. I have a good knee on one side and a troublesome one on the other. I have a bird feeder that needs filling, and a garden that comes back every year whether I ask it to or not, and a TFSA that is more depleted than it has been in a decade, and absolutely no regrets about any of it. I have a photograph that Abby took on the last morning. I am standing at the lake shore with my back partially to the camera, looking out at the water. My coat is the pale blue one I bought specifically for this trip. The mountains are behind me, enormous and completely indifferent, which is part of what I love about them. I look, in the photograph, like a woman who is exactly where she is supposed to be. I had it printed and framed. It hangs in the kitchen, above the counter where I leave my tea. Some mornings I stand and look at it for a while before I do anything else. I think about Abby saying I should go. I think about a child looking at her grandmother and seeing, clearly and without complication, someone who deserved to cry at the mountains. She was right. I cried 3 times. I am not counting the cold. I filled the bird feeder when I got home. A chickadee arrived within the hour, which I took as a sign of something, though I am not the sort of person who usually takes things as signs. Robert would have laughed at me for that. I laughed too.